this segment, Tom goes into detail about the second determinant of sales success, the quality of your presentation. He dissects the sales talk piece by piece, first discussing the approach. Through his instruction, you'll see how easy it can be to have a planned approach that works in virtually any sales situation. He gives you specific examples for both in-person and telephone approaches, whether they're cold or warm calls. Next, he'll teach you the steps involved in the setup phase of your presentation, a step skipped by so many salespeople. He shows you how to set the tone for the entire presentation with your setup, making a yes or a no, hopefully it's a yes, the logical conclusion to your presentations. It's all about taking control at the same time that you give your prospect the feeling that they have the control. And you know, they do have the power to say both yes and no. Either way, Tom teaches that it's your job as a salesperson to bring them to that point of decision. And he'll show you how to do this every time. Tom then transitions into the body of the sales talk and gives you his formula for a quality presentation. You'll definitely want to have a pen and pad handy because he's going to give you some specific presentation tips and phrases that will lead your prospect naturally to that point of decision.
Once you're in front of the prospect, the sales talk is comprised of the basic outline that we'll show you. These are the elements that must be in the presentation, either specifically or implied, to make it complete. These steps follow the initial approach and the setting of the appointment. First, the setup. In the setup, you take control, you establish rapport, you find or create a need, and you create a buying atmosphere. Second, the product demonstration. Within the demonstration, the introduction of price fourth. Third, the trial close, the close, answering objections, and then the second close or the gathering of referrals. Now, wouldn't it be great if it were that simple? Well, from 40,000 feet it is that simple. Now let's work towards ground zero, starting with the approach. The beginning of each phone approach or initial approach should be memorized and written down so you can refer back to it. Just as every young man practices his first call to ask for a date, salespeople should know what they're going to say and memorize it. Some salespeople believe that they know the essence or the gist of what they're going to say. My question for that mindset is this: what's the difference between knowing what you're going to say and knowing exactly what you're going to say? Memorize your approach. It will raise your level of performance. Remember, lightning bolt and lightning bug sound an awful lot alike, but their impacts are very different. Here are two phone approaches I taught when selling from the largest to the smallest banks in the world. Hello, Mr. Parker. My name is Tom Black. I work with XYZ Company. Are you familiar with us? Now, whether they said yes or no, I followed with the same response. Well, XYZ Company provides software that helps banks attract new customers and maintain existing relationships. The reason I called is that I'll be in your area on Tuesday, and I wanted to stop by and introduce my company and myself. Would you have some time on Tuesday morning? Yes. How about 9 or 11? If no objection is given, you've got an appointment. After the appointment, you may try for a larger group meeting by saying something like this: Mr. Jackson, if there are other decision makers that you'd like to invite to the meeting, please do so. Is there anyone else that you'd like to attend? I was actually afraid to do this for a long time. I thought I'd lose the appointment if I tried to bring more people in. But what really happened is I got better appointments. Try it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. To make a consistently exceptional phone approach, here are the important elements. 1, word for word. Plain and simple. Write it out word for word. 2, memorize. Memorize it or put it on a sheet of paper. You may want to laminate the paper. 3, practice makes perfect. Practice it out loud several times. Think to yourself, I am practicing for the Academy Awards. 4, plan out the answers to objections. Write down the answers to the most common objections so you have word-for-word answers on the same sheet with your phone approach. No one is good enough to ad-lib a phone approach every time. Here are some basic rules of thumb to keep in mind about the phone approach. Keep it simple. First, this is in mind, the shorter the better. A one-sentence description of your company is all that should be given before you ask for an appointment. 2, keep it short. Second, you are not selling your product over the phone. In answering objections in a few chapters, getting around questions and objections during the phone approach will be addressed. 3, you must be assumptive and enthusiastic when you ask for the appointment. One technique that helps me make better phone approaches is to stand up during the call. I find myself more assertive and enthusiastic. This way, if you try it for 90 days and it doesn't work better for you, then go back to setting on your better intentions. 4th, don't forget to track successes and failures on your phone approach so that you can set goals to improve your batting average or future approaches. If your approach is in person, the same elements that apply to the phone approach are applicable to the in-person approaches. Write it down, memorize it, practice it out loud several times, and write out the answers to the most common objections and memorize them. These simple steps of preparation mean that you're ready to give a great initial phone or face-to-face approach to the prospect. Here's an in-person cold approach I taught in the banking industry. This approach was targeted for the CEO or president of a prospective bank. Hello, is Mr. Jackson here today? Do your homework, know the correct name before you go in. The secretary will say to you, do you have an appointment? My answer was, no. I was in the area and I just want to stop by and introduce myself and my company. Is Mr. Jackson available? At this point, the secretary either calls to see if he's available or she asks, what's it about? If she asks that question, the answer is, I work with XYZ Company and we provide software to banks that help them attract new customers and strengthen relationships with existing customers. I'd just like to introduce myself and my company. If the CEO comes out, greet him. My name's Tom Black. I was in the area and I wanted to stop by and introduce myself and my company. I'd like to set an appointment to share some important information about our services. Would one day next week be convenient? The CEO will invariably say, what's it about? When this happens, I look at my watch and I say, have you got a few minutes now? If the CEO says yes, you're in. If he says no, then you just set an appointment for later. Assume for a minute that he says, no, I'm too busy right now. Then I respond with, fine, how about one day next week? Would Tuesday morning work for you? Now you know how to execute an approach in person. The dreaded cold call. People always ask me, which is better, an in-person cold call approach or a phone call approach? The answer is, I don't know. It really depends on the industry, the product, and the salesperson. But whatever your industry requires, know what you're going to say and practice it. One sure way not to start is by asking, how do you like me so far? I also wouldn't recommend the approach that the man in this story used. There was a very voluptuous woman who found herself in a sticky situation one day as she was boarding the city bus, or attempting to board it. Her arms were filled with shopping bags, and as she went to step up on the first step, she found that her dress was far too tight to allow her to step up. A crowd was impatiently waiting behind her for their turn to climb on the bus. Well, the woman had an idea. She reached back and as inconspicuously as she could attempted to gain a little reach in her step by pulling down the zipper, just slightly in the back of her dress. It didn't help her at all. So she reached back again in desperation and pulled the zipper even further down, but it did no good. She simply couldn't step up. Suddenly, from behind her, a man picked her up, set her on the bus. The woman looked back at him and exclaimed, "What gives you the right to put your hands on me? I don't even know you." "Well," the man explained, "after you pulled my zipper down the second time, I felt as though we were kind of getting to know each other." The old cliche, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, is a cliche for a reason. It's true. When you approach a potential customer, remember this may be the first time this prospect has ever heard of you or your company. Think about how you want your company and your product to be remembered. Then plan your approach accordingly. When you create a sense of professionalism from the very first words you say, you'll be treated like a professional. And more importantly, you are one step closer to another sale. The demonstration or initial sales presentation should follow the outline laid out in the previous discussion. The setup, where you take control, you establish rapport, you find or create a need, you create a buying atmosphere. Secondly, the product demonstration, the introduction of price, which includes the trial close, and answering objections, and then the second close or asking for referrals. Now that you've gotten past the initial approach, let's look at this outline step by step. Step one is the setup. What do you say to start your presentation? For every product I've sold or taught how to sell, the first rule for delivering a great opening statement is that it must be memorized. In the book business, once I entered a prospect's house, it was my goal to speak first. Whoever spoke first was in control. As I went through the front door, I said, "I've really enjoyed my work around here. Everybody's been so nice and friendly to me. Have you got a place we can sit down?" This statement gave me control and also set the tone for the prospect to treat me like everyone else had, so nice and friendly. Next, I would remark, "You probably know some of the people who've gotten things from me." I'd name the most prominent people, neighbors, and relatives who'd already bought from me. This built that needed trust and began to build a buying atmosphere. I then said, "What I'm doing is just showing something to everybody and then letting them run me off. You do have a big old broom you can use on me, don't you?" This statement also helped to create a buying atmosphere, which made the prospect feel in control. He could feel free to say yes or no. Then I tried to find or create a need with questions like, "So where do you folks attend church? What school do the kids attend? How long have you lived here?" It's important to ask product-specific questions at this point. In the setup, when I sold Bible dictionaries, one of my product-specific questions was, "Have you ever read a word in the Bible you couldn't pronounce or wanted to know more about?" With educational books, I'd ask, "Have your kids ever asked you a school question that you couldn't answer?" The reason for asking product-specific questions is that once you've established rapport, then you are trying to find or create a need with questions. In the banking services business, I followed the same formula. In fact, the fundamentals of this formula will work in most industries and for most products and services. As I walked into the CEO's office, I asked questions like, "How long have you worked here? Where were you before that? I noticed that fish on your wall. Did you catch that?" These questions allowed me to take control and then establish rapport. Once rapport is established, I began asking questions to establish a need. Then you can build trust by telling or showing the prospect other companies in the industry that are doing business with your company. Finally, before I explained my product, I said, "This may be for you and it may not. Just let me know what you think about it." I gave the prospect the feeling of control and I created a buying atmosphere. Again, I don't know of any product that is demonstrated in person where this formula doesn't work. Just to review the steps in the setup, you take control, you establish rapport, you find or create a need, then you create a buying atmosphere. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about each step specifically. Take control. Well, the easiest way to take control is to speak first. Questions are a good way to control the conversation, especially if they're planned. Questions can be of a personal nature, now wait a minute, not too personal, or of a business nature. The second, establish rapport. Well, to establish rapport, you must find a common bond with the prospect. This is the definition of rapport at its base level. One reason you want to establish rapport is to establish the law of psychological reciprocity, which says if you listen to me, I will listen to you. If we have something in common, we will listen to each other. If we have nothing in common, there is no reason for us to talk. The second reason for rapport building is to build trust. We have something in common, so I can trust you. Finally, you establish rapport to answer the prospect's curiosity about who you are. If I want the prospect to pay attention to me, I need to remove the questions about who I am. You can establish rapport by mentioning people that you know in common, by talking about things that you do in common, or by bringing up things that you believe in common. For example, if you've sold all of the friends of your prospect, you can use those names to establish rapport. If your prospect is a sports fan, you can discuss sports. Now that'd be a good technique with me. And if the prospect has political items in his office, talk some light politics. And notice I said light politics. Sometimes you may be in a situation where you find yourself looking for a way to establish rapport. Here's an idea that's worked for me over the years. If you're in someone's home or office, look for an item that's out of place. This is usually the item your prospect is most proud of, and there's likely a story behind it. That's why his good taste is overruled, and he has something placed in prominent view that doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the decor. If something's out of place, there's a good reason. I've found that this reason is a great source for rapport building, so look for it. 3, find or create a need. At this point in the presentation, you've taken control and you've established rapport. Now you must find or create a need. Remember Tongue-Tied Charlie who sold toothbrushes? He created a need. Want to buy a toothbrush? In the banking business, I ask questions about ROA, that's return on assets, ROE, that's return on equity, loan-to-deposit ratios, numbers of demand deposit accounts, and other questions. The questions diagnose the prospect's bank in order to see if our product would meet the customer's needs. They were also designed to focus the prospect's thoughts exactly where I wanted them. See, the CEO of a bank has a million things on his mind, and believe me, they are not all in the areas that my product serves. That's why these questions should be pre-planned and memorized. This is true no matter what industry you're in. In the book business, I created a need by identifying the areas that a prospect's family's children had issues with in school. I found that parents would buy almost anything if they thought it would make their kids' lives a little easier. All I did was find that tricky subject or area of greatest difficulty, and that naturally created a need for the educational products my company offered. Create a buying atmosphere. To create that essential buying atmosphere, some specific statements must be made. Two things work to accomplish this. One, showing the prospect the names of other people who've bought, and two, making statements designed to help the prospect feel in control. Here are some of these statements. I wouldn't want you to buy this product if it didn't help you. This may be something you want, and it may not be. That's up to you. This product isn't for everyone. It may be for you, and it may not. Whether you find this product is a fit or not is fine, but it's always good to know what others in your industry are doing. When I first started using these takeaways, I was afraid I'd be encouraging the prospect not to buy, giving them an escape clause. However, what I found was that it actually encouraged the prospect and me to have a more open and less defensive conversation. Try it. You'll be surprised. We've finished the setup. So now you must ask yourself if your setup has the elements just discussed. Countless salespeople skip this entire process. One of the 4 steps will be left out of the setup process. They feel uncomfortable about asking questions, taking control, or giving the prospect the feeling of control. Most of the time it's because the salesperson hasn't planned the setup, memorized an opening, or simply lacks confidence to do the job right. Whatever the reason, salespeople who begin a product demonstration without going through these steps are starting behind where they could be and are putting themselves at a disadvantage from the start. Can you imagine a doctor who came into the examination room, asked no questions, and then told the patient what was wrong? We'd call him a quack. In training, I tell new salespeople that the setup is what a doctor does before he gives you the exam. Before he puts the rubber gloves on, he establishes rapport, finds a need, makes you feel comfortable, creates a buying atmosphere, and then does the examination. This is the essence of the setup. A word of caution. If you are still in the setup and your prospect says something like, "Tell me what it is you're selling," you've talked too long in this phase of the presentation. That's why having it planned and enthusiastic is critical to your ultimate success. Once the setup is in place, you can move confidently into the body of the demonstration. Here's a good way to transition from the setup to the presentation. Let me quickly show you how our product works. We offer a software product that allows you to manage your commercial loans better and more efficiently. In the door-to-door book business, my transition was, let me show you what everyone else has been so excited about. It's called the Family Bible Library, and it covers the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Transitions like these are essentially one-sentence explanations of your product. The idea is to hold the prospect's interest and move you forward as quickly as possible. Remember, ultimately you are headed for the buying line. Now it's time to demonstrate your product or service. There is a very basic and very precise format to the correctly planned presentation. It's called the Feature, Benefit, Question, Presentation, or FBQ. Here's an example. Feature, our software gives you daily reports. Benefit, so you can always know where you stand. Question, that would be helpful, wouldn't it? If you have to write your own sales talk or tweak what you're already using, make sure FBQ is the general flow of the presentation. Every time I write a sales presentation for a new product, I write down the features on one side of the paper, the benefits on the other, and on another sheet of paper I write down questions that seal off those benefits for the prospects. Specific presentation tips. First, keep it simple. Your presentation should be like a miniskirt, long enough to cover the subject, but short enough to hold their interest. First, deliver one-sentence statement of purpose. We sell exciting new software that allows our convenience stores to issue their own money orders. Then add 2 or 3 sentences about the company and yourself. XYZ Corporation has been in business for 15 years. We work with over 5,000 convenience stores in all 50 states. I've been with the company for 15 years. With that simple step, you successfully and quickly remove the unspoken question of who you are. I've heard it said that we retain 50% more of what we hear and see than of what we just hear. That's why I believe strongly in the use of visuals. I've used flip charts, PowerPoint slides, and even laminated sheets of paper given loosely to the prospect. Whatever it is, show him something. Flip charts or PowerPoint presentations are ideal because they give you an automatic outline for a planned sales talk. If you're selling a product like books, for example, the products themselves are your PowerPoint presentation. You have to have a logical flow through the presentation. It must make sense. Like a story or a TV show plot line, your prospect is being led logically to the buying line. It doesn't have to be long, but it does have to answer the most frequently asked questions about your product and explain the benefits. It also has to pre-answer the most frequently voiced objections about your product, because every great salesperson knows the best time to answer an objection is before it comes up. Once your prospect has voiced the objection, it has more power and authority because he's verbally expressed it to you. And it's better that you answer it before he wears it than after he's gotten his ego into it. 3, load up on questions. Your presentation must always be loaded with questions. Questions grab your prospect's attention. It's impossible to sleep while you're being asked questions. Second, questions show that you respect the prospect and are interested in his opinion. It makes the process interactive. Third, questions allow you to be in control. The person asking pre-planned question is always in control of the direction of the conversation. And finally, questions lead the prospect in a direction towards a favorable yes. Can you imagine a presentation where you explain the product and get no feedback until the close, and then you say, "So do you want one or not?" That would be crazy. I've witnessed many presentations with very few questions, and inevitably there was absolutely no buying momentum on which to successfully close. One yes is all you need. There are several reasons salespeople don't ask questions in their presentation. One reason is fear of a negative answer. Sometimes, though, you need those negative answers to know what the prospect is thinking. Don't be afraid of a negative response. After all, you only need one yes. Second, salespeople don't ask questions because they don't have pre-planned questions. It would be highly difficult to think of enough good questions in a sales presentation off the top of your head. The solution, questions in the presentation must be pre-planned. Building yes momentum. Aristotle developed a method of asking questions called the dialectic. The theory was that if you answered his first question with a yes, he could lead you to the conclusion he desired logically. One yes leads to another, and another, and another. This is true. We want to get a series of yeses from our prospect that lead to the really big yes, but most sales are made emotionally and justified logically, so just getting a series of yeses is good, but it doesn't guarantee the bigger yes, the yes I want to buy. The best questions in your presentation are positioned so that they invoke that yes. There is something psychologically appealing about your prospect saying yes over and over again, and this is called yes momentum. And you can only get it by asking questions. I'm a believer in a large vocabulary, but simple words and simple sentences work much better in sales situations. You know, every time I hear a salesperson use a big word, I wonder, is he trying to impress the prospect? I'll bet the prospect is thinking, is he trying to impress me? Anything that puts a barrier between you and the prospect should be avoided at all costs. You know, besides, the really important words are small words like love and trust, faith and hope. Those are the kind of words that will make your presentation better anyway. 5, the P word, price. Price, a word dreaded by both prospect and salesperson alike, but it is the inevitable conclusion in a sales situation. If a prospect wants your product, he knows he's going to have to pay for it. The ideal place to introduce price is somewhere near the end of the presentation. And this is how I recommend you do that. First of all, realize that everyone is wondering whether what you're selling is worth the price. If you told your prospect the price before you showed him the benefits, he'd be evaluating that number, the price, the whole time you were explaining the benefits. And it would be less than the best atmosphere for selling. So wait until you explained all the benefits before you introduce the price. If you get the price question in the middle of the presentation, it can be a good sign, a buying sign, or it can be a bad sign, a lack of interest in the product. If you're unsure which direction he's taking, you can say, I'm going to get to that in just a second, but trust me, you can afford it if you like it. Or say, it's less than $1 million. Seriously, I'm going to fully explain that in just a minute, but I'm sure you're going to like the price. Once you've disclosed the price, it's more difficult to explain the benefits because all the prospect is thinking about is that dollar figure, the price build-up. Let's assume you get to introduce the price when you want to introduce it, near the end. Then I believe you should have something I call the price build-up. That means you use names, enthusiasm, and comparisons to justify your position. In the book business, here was my price build-up, both simple and effective. Now, Ms. Jackson, we've been playing a game with everyone out here. We've been asking them to guess how much something like this would cost. You know, Mrs. Stevens guessed it was $200 and Mrs. Carter guessed $175, but actually they're just $99.95, and that's for the whole set. That's reasonable, isn't it? In selling products to banks, most products were sold on the basis of ROI, return on investment. So I used a sheet in my presentations that said, this is how much you make from our program. And this sheet showed my prospect the ROIs from existing customers and specific ROI examples. I then had a second sheet that said, this is how we get paid. I finished with a question to seal off the price like this. There aren't a lot of places a bank can get that kind of return on their investment, is there? Many times I've been in presentations with salespeople who don't use a price build-up and don't wait until the benefits have been fully explained to reveal the price. These are mistakes. They may not cost you the sale every time, but they certainly will some of the time. If your current sales talk doesn't have a price build-up, then put one in yourself. Another element of any good sales presentation is a trial close. I put a trial close in after the introduction of price so that the prospect has all the important information before I get to this point. You may decide to put it in before the price build-up, but it invites objections a little prematurely. However, I leave myself some room to maneuver if I need to keep selling. Here's my trial close for almost any product I've sold. How's it sound so far? This was not the trial close I used in selling books because those were one-call closes and that question would have invited the I want to think about it objection. This is something you don't want to do in one-call selling situations. However, in selling products to banks, the question was fine and allowed me to know where I stood. Usually the prospect would say, it sounds pretty good, but. The but was a soft objection and I dealt with it accordingly. Tack on a fact. After the trial close, I recommend you have one other fact about the product and then move into the actual close. The fact I tacked on for every banking product was this. It takes about 90 days to be up and running once you decide to do this. It was simple, a transition to the close if the trial close had gotten a favorable answer. This trial closing question, how does it sound so far, is one you can use with any product, so try it. Overselling your way out of the sale. Now, overselling is a dangerous road down which far too many salespeople travel. Overselling means giving more information than necessary once a prospect's interest level has crossed the buying line. It is not usually done in the close. It occurs sometimes before the close. Here's a story that illustrates the danger of overselling. There was a Catholic girl who was dating a Baptist boy. She really liked the boy, but she was afraid their families would never agree to a marriage because of the religious differences. So the girl's mother suggested, get him to convert to Catholicism. He'll never be more interested than he is now. Sure enough, the boy started going to Catholic training. Things seemed to be going along great. And then one night, the girl came home crying to her mother. It's over. The wedding's off. Her mother said, what happened? I thought you had him sold. And the girl replied, I did, Mother, but I oversold him. He wants to be a priest. Overselling, the buying line revisited. Here is what overselling looks like on the buying line chart. Anything said once you cross the buying line is overselling by definition. Every salesperson's goal should be to hit the buying line and the close at the same time. One way to do that is with great questions that indicate where you stand. You'll never get these if you're afraid to close. I've seen countless salespeople who are afraid to close. Know this fear of closing and call reluctance are the two biggest reasons salespeople fail. It is not natural to bring people to a point of decision, especially if you don't know them. But a planned close saves you if you just flow into it after you've introduced the price. Remember, You may not need all the steps of your presentation if the prospect's ready to buy. I overheard this conversation at an airport in one of the airline lounges I was waiting in. Two men, and we'll call them man one and man two, were sitting together and obviously didn't know each other. Man one said to man two, "So what do you do?" Man two responded, "I'm in sales." So man one says, "Are you any good at it?" And man two says, "Some people say so." Now man one says, "So sell me something." Man two responds, "I haven't got anything to sell you." So then man one looks around and says, well, how about this ashtray?" Man two warms to the challenge. He says, "What would you want with an ashtray?" Man one replies, "Oh, I don't know. I could put it on my dresser to hold my loose change since I don't smoke." So man two asks, "Well, what would an ashtray like that be worth?" Man one shrugs and says, "Well, not over $5. And then man two smiles and says, "Sold." You see, once you've established or created a need for your product and agreed upon price, it's time to move to the close. The close on its most fundamental level is merely a matter of bringing the prospect to a point of decision. A close is neither positive nor negative. It is simply the decision, the yes or no. Once you've told your story, it's time to get a decision, and this is the close. Think about the close in this way. A young man and a young woman in high school went to the drive-in movie. The girl scooted over next to the boy, gently grabbed his hand. She put her head on his shoulder. He reached over, he turned up the volume on the speaker. As he did, she sent a stream of warm air towards his ear. Now at this point, when he reaches over to kiss her, do you honestly think she'll stop him and say, "I didn't say you could do that"? No. She gave him all the buying signs. This story is the perfect example of the close, a series of questions that lead to the ultimate yes. There is no pressure in this type of close. Some general rules about the close. First, the close should be memorized. That's right, word for word. It's just too important to ad-lib or wing it. Your close can generally be the same for every prospect, so that means it can be memorized. Here are two closes for two products. The first is for a software product I sold to banks. "Mr. Jackson, let me ask you this. What kind of decision-making process do you go through here in order to determine whether you would want to implement a program like this?" The prospect answers this question, and this answer is irrelevant, unless the prospect says that he is definitely not interested. Other than total disinterest, any other response at this point is fine. The prospect may say, "I need board approval," or "I need to think about it," or "It's totally my call." Whatever the answer, my response is the same. Mr. Jackson, what most banks do is two things. They have me meet with other decision makers and influencers, and second, they call on a few references. Would there be other people you'd like me to meet with and explain the program to? Here is the first real moment of decision. Here the prospect has to make a minor decision that leads to a bigger yes. If the prospect says, "No, I'll tell the board about it," that means he isn't sold yet. So stop closing and try to determine the objection and then answer it. However, if the prospect says, "Yes, I would like you to meet with them," then ask the next minor question. "Could I do that today or sometime this week?" Here, pull out your calendar. This question combines two techniques for closing that we'll cover later in this chapter: alternative of choice and minor decision. Either option the prospect chooses in this situation is good for you. So this is another minor question that leads once again to the big yes. If the prospect chooses either one, then ask the prospect this question: "Mr. Jackson, who would you like in the meeting?" Here's another close, the close I used in the book business. It started like this: "Mrs. Stevenson, what everybody likes about the way I do business is that I'm taking orders today, and I'll be delivering your books at the end of the summer. I bring them back myself so you can make sure they're just like I told you they'd be. I'll send you a postcard about 2 weeks ahead before I come, telling you the exact day I'll be back." First minor question and decision. I'm sure you'd rather have me bring them back than someone else, wouldn't you? If an objection is given, stop closing and show more features and benefits. If there is a yes response or no objection, we continued with, "Could someone be home in the morning or evening if you had 2 weeks' notice?" That's an alternative of choice question. Get a yes here and keep going. "Great. How do you get your mail here?" At this point in the close, I'd pick up the order book and start to write. Once I had the address, I'd show the prospect the receipt with the price and the sales tax and say, "Now, if you can okay this, I'll send you that card." And with that, the sale was complete. Both of these closes use some specific techniques you should use when closing. The first is called the assumptive close. If the prospect answers all the questions with a yes, they will give you a big yes at the end, and you're assuming the sale with each closing question. People usually don't say yes, 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 no. 2, alternative of choice. The second technique is the alternative of choice. When both options are good, it makes it easier for the prospect to buy. We use this every day in real life, so it should come naturally in the closing. In the closing examples I just gave, the alternative of choice technique was used as a minor decision question that leads to the ultimate buying decision. 3, your body says yes before they do. The final technique is positive body action. In the first close, I pull out my calendar. This is aptly called the calendar close. In the second close, I pulled out the order book, and guess what? I call this the order book close. They're creative names, aren't they? But these 3 techniques should be used whenever you're bringing a prospect to a decision. It makes the decision process easier for the prospect and for you. I've heard salespeople say, I don't want to pressure the prospect, or I don't want to trick them. And I have to laugh, because you may be good, but it's doubtful that you're good enough to trick someone into buying by using any of these techniques. I never could. I've also heard people say, that's too much pressure. Those techniques aren't pressure. Here's pressure. So do you want them or not? That's real pressure. What you're doing with the techniques we discussed is leading the prospect and making it easier to buy. In life, we do the same thing, and kids are especially good at this. We all ask indirect questions which assume a yes to a bigger question. I love to close when there was an impending event. You see it in advertising all the time. Sale ends Monday. We've used all these. Mr. Jackson, our prices are going up tomorrow, or Mr. Jackson, we're offering a discount on all our programs that are bought this month. When you can incorporate an impending event, then that event provides some real power to get a decision. Many times in the close or pre-close, I set the time framework for the decision. Mr. Jackson, most bankers spend about 2 weeks doing their homework, and then they let us know whether they want to move forward or not. Does that sound fair? The prospect may push back, but whatever time frame you agree upon is better than no time frame at all. What about the old saying, he who talks first loses? I couldn't agree more. When you ask the obligating question, wait for the answer. Don't interrupt yourself. No matter how long you have to wait, just wait and then wait longer. In one close I remember feeling like each second was an hour. I could actually feel the tension in the air. After I'd asked the obligating question, the silence was deafening as the banker just sat there looking at the contract. I'd explained it, he'd agreed on it, and now it was his turn to sign the agreement, and he finally did. I know that if I'd have started talking, the deal would not have gotten signed. Expect an answer to your obligating question, and then wait for it.
Talk piece by piece.
Humor can be good in the close. It's not the time to tell a story, but a witty remark can ease the tension. You know, Mr. Jackson, no CEOs who ever bought this program got fired for their decision. Does that make you feel better? In the book business, I'd like to say, what most people do is give me a $100 bill, and I bring them the change with their books. The books are only $60. Find your own joke and stick it in your toolkit. It gives the prospect the sense that the decision is no big deal, and it brings you closer to the prospect as well. Who said you can't have fun with your prospect? I've always heard sales managers tell their sales force to close early and close often. In the book business, after 4 summers and 20,000 prospects, I could tell. I've had prospects buy after I'd read the names of the other people who bought. They never even saw the books until after they signed the order. You can definitely close before you planned in your sales presentation, but until you become an expert at reading interest level in your prospect, don't do it. Stick with the plan. When new salespeople are in training, I often take them with me on sales calls to show them how to close. I'll say to a prospect, Mr. Jackson, I'm very excited about our product. In fact, sometimes I talk way past the point you may be ready to buy. If I do, will you just raise your hand? I've had lots of prospects raise their hands. Why? Because what I did creates a buying atmosphere and puts the prospect in control. What about closing with resistance? Sure, I think we all do that from time to time. Here's my rule. When the prospect gives me an objection that I perceive as real, I give additional information before I close again. You'll be seen as a high-pressure salesperson if you close again after an objection without giving additional information that can help the prospect change his mind. Once you've given him additional information, then you can close again. In the section on answering objections, I cover this thoroughly.